Hi, this is Jeannie. Welcome to Cakes and Aprons. Today we are going all the way back to 1913 to make a wedding cake. And the sweet apron that I'm wearing was handcrafted somewhere between 1915 and 1930. Many aprons in 1913 were adorned with embroidery and lace. Though aprons worn at this time often went down to the ankle, many aprons could also be shorter, like the cute tea apron seen here, and like the one that I'm wearing. And today's cake is a heart-shaped wedding cake because I just got back from getting married. Wedding cakes during this era were made of a traditional sponge cake, which were often made at the bride's home and then iced at a confectioner's house. However, this cake was made by a celebrity baker at the time. This cake from 1913 carries with it a really cool background. Its creator, Mrs. Betty Lyles Wilson, was a noted domestic chef. She was very humble in saying she was just a regular housewife and chef, but she was the Martha Stewart of her day. Though unrelated to the Woodrow Wilson family, she adapted a favorite white cake recipe to bake a small heart-shaped bride's cake decorated in pink and white frosting for the White House wedding of President Woodrow Wilson's daughter. Betty Lyles Wilson published her first cookbook in 1914 and then did a second revised edition called Mrs. Wilson's New Cookbook in 1920, just like you see here. So let's travel back to 1913 and see what weddings were like then, because this is the time period when most of our wedding traditions today come from. It's time to crank up the Victrola and play the most popular song from 1913, which also was the most popular wedding song of the time, You Made Me Love You.
You made me love you. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. You made me want to.
The traditional white wedding dress became very popular at this time as a symbol of status and as a representation of innocence and virtue. And it was only a few decades later when this dress became cemented in tradition as the traditional wedding dress. Another tradition that was created during this time was the idea of anniversary gifts. See, this was the era when love match was invented. Before this, it was just arranged marriages for status or economic reasons. And some traditional conservatives were horrified by the idea. They wondered, what in the world will we do to get people married and keep them married if love is the main reason? Hence, so there began this emphasis on building a love and commitment and a celebration of this commitment each year of the marriage. In the 1800s, it was traditional for the bride only to cut the cake. However, this changed in the early 1900s. Cutting of the cake was the first task the couple did together, and therefore, cutting it together symbolized an equal marriage where the bride and groom would continue to work together on tasks. And then this is followed by the tradition of the toast, where guests and loved ones can toast to the happiness and the unity of the couple. Some of the customs that were established during this time we no longer adhere to. For instance, it was uncouth to have a wedding over the weekend. More than a century ago, there was a rhyme that helped brides pick a date. Mondays were for wealth, Tuesdays for health, Wednesdays the best day of all, Thursdays for crosses, Fridays for losses, and Saturdays for no look at all. In fact, the 1903 White House Wedding Etiquette Guide reminded young society women of the rhyme and also noted that in addition to bringing terrible luck, Saturdays were just terribly unfashionable for weddings. Also, weddings used to be a lot earlier. High noon was the best time. And a 2 o'clock wedding was also fashionable. Nowadays, many weddings are a little bit later. Another tradition that we no longer practice is that the bridesmaids would often wear the same dresses as the bride. This was from an earlier belief that the brides must try to help protect the bride and look just like them. They were being decoys for evil spirits or exes who might show up to thwart the wedding. This is an image from 1917. These bridesmaids match their bride in fancy striped frocks and hats. So it makes sense that this era really marked a time where we set a lot of our wedding traditions today, because this was the time period where they really believed love conquered all. The first time that love match marriages were on the rise. This was also depicted in the newest Hollywood films of the time, like this one, My Baby with Mary Pickford. So let's make our wedding cake from 1913. We will be making the bride's cake that was used as an advertisement in a magazine. However, there is a bride's cake also in her cookbook, and I will be putting this one and the one that we're making today in my blog. See below for details. You will need shortening, sugar, baking powder, flour, salt. You will also need sweet milk, which is regular milk. You will need almond extract and vanilla extract, and you will need 8 whipped egg whites. First, you will separate your eggs and egg yolk, and then whip up your egg whites until they form stiff peaks. I decided to do the old-fashioned way with a whisk. It said maybe only 7 minutes. Mine took me about almost 12 minutes, but I did it. Add a teaspoon of almond extract into the egg whites, and then begin to cream your 1 cup of shortening and 2 cups of sugar together well. Then sift together your flour, your salt, and your baking powder, and then blend this in with your cream mixture, alternating the milk and then also the sifted dry ingredients. Finally, you put in the vanilla extract and then fold in your 8 egg whites.
Yes, I do. Deed I do. You know I do. Gimme, 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 gimme what I cry for. You know you got the kind of kisses that I die for.
Next, it says to soft bake, so that's only 325 degrees for an hour and 10 minutes. It should be perfectly firm to the touch. The icing for the cake in Mrs. Wilson's cookbook is just like a lot of the boiled frostings or fluffy white frostings that we know of. And first you will start with whipping the egg whites and then heat up the water and the sugar over the stove. You will be making a simple syrup that you will add to the egg whites. I will tell you that I did this about 3 times. I've done this icing before, but this time it didn't work, so I scratched that. What I did is I did an apricot filling on my cake, and then I used buttercream frosting, which is typical of today's cakes, and I will add that one into my blog. My mother told me later that sometimes that boiled kind of icing doesn't always work on a very humid day, which is what I'm experiencing today. So I decorated with my buttercream frosting. I did not decorate as much as they did in their picture, but I had fun using this old-fashioned kind of tool to drape the frosting, and I added sugar flowers to mine.
You made me love you. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it.
And now we get to try Mrs. Wilson's bride cake from 1913. This cake is really heavy, so I know it's really dense. I'm hoping that my sponge cake is light and fluffy. It was a really different recipe than what we see today. All right, I know there's tricks on how to cut this, but I'm just gonna dig in. I'm actually a little nervous because I'm not sure if I'm going to love it. Well, we shall see. There it is. So far, so good. Oh wow, it is really soft. With such a heavy cake, I was wondering, but it feels really light and fluffy. It's light, it's fluffy. I love it actually. So I will eat this cake. I feel much better about it. Thank you so much for coming to Cakes and Aprons. I hope to see you next time. Bye.